In today's episode, I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with both Kirsten Jones and Melinda Kirschner. Now, Kirsten is a Hall of Fame D1 volleyball player from the College of William & Mary. She is a former Nike executive working there for over 14 years and is now a motivational speaker, writer, and peak performance coach. She is also the host of the Raising Athletes podcast and authored the incredible book, Raising Empowered Athletes, a youth sports parenting guide for raising happy, brave, and resilient kids. Now, Melinda Kirschner is the former director of UCLA Athletics Mental Health Services. Over the course of her tenure at UCLA, she worked closely with the men's and women's indoor volleyball, beach volleyball, swim and dive, and women's tennis teams. In 2022, she worked with the UCLA women's soccer team and was on the sidelines as the team brought home the 2022 National Championship. In our conversation today, this is one I've been waiting to have for almost a year now, where we do a deep dive in this new landscape of youth sports. And we talk about how and when youth sports got so crazy, where kids are specializing early and over-involvement with parents and understanding the fast-changing game and how we as parents and how we as coaches can really take a step back and make sure we are raising healthy athletes. Are we being transactional or transformational coaches? Are we giving ownership of this youth sports experience to the kids, or are we seeing it as our dream? And we do a deep dive into this new recruiting process and understanding the new transfer portal and NIL deals in the world of college athletics, and just give the do's and don'ts of what we can do best to guide our kids to get to that next step. So I know you're going to have so many great takeaways from this conversation. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy this talk with Kirsten Jones and Melinda Kirschner. Kirsten Jones and Melinda Kirschner, welcome to the Being Champions podcast.
Thanks for having us. I'm so excited.
Thank you. Great to be here with you both.
Yeah, I am really fired up today. I wanted to give our listeners some quick context. So Melinda, this has been actually a year in the making, I think. We connected about a year ago, right around this time, right around the end of May, where, every year I'm trying to look to fine tune our systems within athletics, right? And looking at the bigger picture. And it's not just about tactics. It's not just about scoreboard. It's that big picture. How do we develop great young men, great young women? And I think one of the big pieces we were missing was the mental performance side and really paying attention and being intentional about creating space for our kids to work on the mental side. So we connected, we put together 8 workshops for our kids that I had the chance to deliver to pretty much every team on campus.
Yep.
And we were talking about putting together a parent workshop. And again, that got delayed a little bit. You had a baby.
Yes.
Here we are today. And then what was really cool, Melinda, they're like, I have this great friend, Kirsten Jones. She wrote an amazing book, Raising Empowered Athletes. We should all sit down and do a podcast together. And here we are a year later, sitting down, about to have a great conversation.
I love it. Yeah. I so appreciate, Matt, the work that we did. And I can share a little bit about my background, but one of the reasons I left UCLA, I was there for 13 years. I started off as an intern there, and I finished as the director of mental health for student athletes. And I really felt inspired to bring some of the work that we're doing in the collegiate space to youth sport and to high schools. And so I'm super excited that we were able to get the conversation started and just to get some skills out there for athletes and engage coaches and parents. And so I'm happy to be here and just have so appreciated the work we did this year.
I love it. So before we dive into the conversation, let's share a little bit about your background, Kirsten and Melinda. Growing up in the world of sports and now the work that you do in sports. Just take a couple of minutes. Let's share a little bit about your background.
You jump in first.
Go ahead, Kirsten.
I just shared a little bit about mine, but Kirsten, you jump in.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm a product of the 70s and 80s. I was raised in Montana, rural Montana, where you just played whatever sport was in front of you, as most of us did. You played until you couldn't see anymore. Your parents could care less if you played. I mean, almost my parents in high school, they wanted me to do piano and ballet, which was like nails on a chalkboard to me because I was always chasing a ball. But when I decided that I wanted to pursue playing volleyball in college, they said, "Awesome, go for it." And so I loved having that experience where, again, my parents weren't overly invested in it. So had I decided to quit, they would have been like, fine. In fact, when I hit a wall in college, my dad called and said, you know what, maybe you're done with this volleyball thing. I ended up pivoting and going from San Diego State to William and Mary, getting a degree in East Asian Studies, getting to play, a little bit overseas, living in Japan for a bit before I found Nike, and then worked for Nike for 15 years in Europe and at world headquarters. And that was kind of the predecessor to what I'm doing now, which is working with parents, athletes, coaches all around how do we make this $37 billion business of youth sports, the giant hairball that it is, fun again. And there's so much that's been sucked out of it for the kids because of money getting involved.
Yeah. And Melinda, what about you?
I mean, I shared a little bit about my professional background. So I mentioned I was at UCLA for 13 years. A mentor of mine, Bob Core, brought me in as an intern working with student athletes, and I absolutely loved it. I don't know why it wasn't on my mind before getting there. I just loved every different clinical rounds I had done prior to that. And so I was really excited to work with athletes during internship. And then in fellowship, I specialize in eating disorders and also working with student athletes. And then eventually we grew the program out. And yeah, the rest is sort of history. And I pivoted when I got pregnant and eventually had my daughter. So that was really exciting. And I decided to go full-time private practice and started my practice called For the Players, really inspired by the athletes that I'd worked with. Because I think for me, when times got difficult and challenging, I always thought to myself, like, I'm doing this for the athletes. And so that was really kind of where I came up with the name of my practice. And I'll say just personally, my older brother really inspired me to play lacrosse when I was younger. I previously rode horses since I was like maybe 4 or 5, competitively, and I was super all in. And he was kind of like, nudge, nudge, maybe you should play lacrosse or field hockey, and got me a lacrosse stick, and we used to play out in the backyard. And I was just one of those kids that like would practice after practice, just couldn't get enough. And I had such a wonderful experience, and I'm super grateful for him. And so him and I have always connected around sports. And, similarly, our dad was like, don't waste your time. Like, you should be a doctor or a lawyer, one of the two, and, but he did allow us to jump in. And I think, Rick and I have always connected around that.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I heard from both of you is that there wasn't so much pressure for us back then. Like, I was the same way. I grew up, I was the 70s, and I don't even remember my parents actually going to games or anything like that. They basically would just drop me off, let me do my thing, and then they would pick me up. And I mean, there might be a couple questions like, how was the game? But there was no pressure. Like, it was more natural. And I actually, I had ownership of the game. And I fell in love with the game, and that naturally brought me into college. I was lucky enough to compete in college. But I think that the big question is how did we get here? How did we get to this $37.5 billion industry? I'm thinking I work at the high school level. Our kids can get NIL deals now. So now they can get paid to be athletes. So let's talk about that first. How did we get here? What are some of the main factors that you all have seen that had made this shift into this uncharted territory?
Well, in the 70s, Tiger Woods and Wayne Gretzky and, those types of athletes were starting to have these 10,000 hour rule experiences.
Yep.
Combine that with in 1979, this little channel ESPN comes online. At the same time, a boy gets abducted in Florida, and, Adam Walsh. And so we turn on our TVs, 37 million people turn on their TVs around the same time to find out, it's a really scary world. We can't just let our kids go play in the streets anymore. Combine that with, in the 40s and 50s, about 10 to 15% of women worked outside of the home. By the 70s and 80s, that number had doubled. Almost 40 to 50% of women are working outside of the home. So now we need something for them to do. We can't let them run outside and just play in the streets. Oh, and then there's this no child left behind thing that happens where our kids are falling behind academically, which is where the academic pressure starts to come as well. So that's what I frame up in my book, is really my theory around where a lot of this started was, 10,000 hour rule meets everybody being able to see it on TV, meets the fear of being left behind physically or academically, as well as what can we do? And I think it starts from a very, very kind and good-hearted place, which is dad says, I'll coach, I'll help.
Yeah.
And I think that's great. And that's where it started. But then you get, fast forward to now my children are 24, 21, and 19. But
Yeah.
I remember just even a few years ago where the dads are involved. They've got spreadsheets out there. I've had one dad that said to my son, just dribble with your left hand the whole time. Just pretend like you don't know how to play so that I can get you onto my, we all start scheming to make sure that we get the best, so that we can win. And then I think that's where, then money gets involved. Nike and Adidas come calling, because if we put some money into these shoe teams, then we're really, so it's been going on NIL for the last, 50 years. We're just now calling a spade and actually saying, okay, it's legal. We don't have to pretend. Coach K doesn't have to look the other way while the alumni slide the money under the door. We can actually offer it to them up front.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I think of it more like the sort of the road of the elite athlete, like, the young player who starts to stand out, and and people see the talent, right? And so they're having fun, no pressure, and people start to send that message, the narrative of like, wow, you're so talented, right? And sort of like the train starts moving and they're on it. And in the beginning, it's like exciting. Like people are telling me I'm good. But then I feel like the pressure just mounts and mounts and mounts. And I was listening to, I think it was Kristen Press and Tobin Heath, where we're dialoguing the other day. And Kristen Press said she did some work in therapy, and she asks herself, like, do I still want to do this? Because she basically said, nobody asked me.
Yep.
And it kind of like, I sort of liken it to like the train's moving and everyone's like, this is amazing. And parents are like, this is so great. Like, you're so talented. We'll get you a coach. We'll get you a, strength trainer. We'll get you a dietitian. We'll get you a sports psychologist. Like, and with really good intention, like, supporting, but then it winds up feeling like so much pressure and everyone's invested so much. And I think that to me feels like sort of the dangers these days.
Yeah, a couple of things jump out was the word pressure kept coming up from both of y'all, right? And it's one of those understanding the difference between pressure and support. And then you both talked about where, as parents, and I'm a parent as well, I have a 9-year-old son who's now navigating the youth sports landscape. And Kirsten, you said it's we never go into it with bad intention, right? We want the best for our kid, right? But now this whole shift with this over involvement with parents, and you hear all the phrases. We have snowplow parents, we have the drone parents, we have the helicopter parents. What advice do you give to the parents to make sure we can step back and really see whose dream is this really? It's the kid's dream, but how do we make this step back where we're actually giving the support and not adding on all this extra pressure?
Yeah, I had a woman on the phone yesterday actually who wants me to come speak at her school because she said, we need this. The parents are out of control. It's getting worse and worse. She said, but my daughter is number 27 in the country in gymnastics. She's really, really good.
Yeah.
And she really, really loves it. And we're really, really all in. And she just went to nationals and she got 6th place. And she was the first one. And she goes, and I'm ready to post the picture. And I'm so excited to put this on my story. And she says, Mom, knock it off.
Right.
And she's 12, right?
Yeah.
And she goes, and I was kind of like, oh, well, and she goes, I'm invested. Like, no. I spend all these hours driving you to the gym back and forth and sitting on the sidelines and going to all these competitions. And that's the problem, is we've not only emotionally, but monetarily, physically invested all of and so our egos get really wrapped up in, the most egoic thing we can do as humans is to have a child, right? Like,
Mhm.
progeny. Look at what I created, the most perfect thing ever, right? And when we do that, immediately the kids labeled with, like all of this pressure, and understanding that, that is one of the chapters in the book. Whose dream is it?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
we need to have 90 1-minute conversations with our kid, not 190. Well, your son at 9, he says he wants to go play in the MLB. All right, well, I'm all in.
Yeah.
No, I mean, that's beautiful. And yes, we want to support his dream. And let's check in at 12. Let's check in at 15. Let's check in at 20.
Mhm.
At some point, that dream may die or it may pivot. That's okay.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I can so relate. Like, my daughter's only 6 months old, and I was joking with Kirsten the other day. Like, we're like, well, she's got a really great like left foot, and like her,
Yeah.
look at these long fingers. She's got to reach. I'm like, oh, maybe she'll play volleyball. This could be so cool. And it's so, you like want the best, and so I can totally relate to that. And there's a book called The Self-Driven Child, which I love. And the authors talk a lot about this model of like parents as consultants. And so I really encourage parents to think of that. Like same thing, Kirsten, that you're asking, like, making sure you're checking in over time. Like, do you still want to do this? Is this still feeling, the same way? Do you still, you said 5 years ago you wanted to do this. Where are you at now? And just like inviting curiosity, leaving space for options and pivoting, like if you need to or want to. And so I love this idea of like encouraging parents to be consultants to their kids and making sure the kids leading, and then they're supporting.
Yeah, and I know, Kirsten, you put that in your book. Like we get stuck asking the two questions: Are we all in, or are we all out? Right? And sometimes we feel like we have to be one way or the other. But it's all about balance, right? And finding that balance. And I think the biggest thing for us, I know the work that we do, is we're just trying to raise healthy athletes. Right, making sure we're providing the best environment and the best experience for them. And a lot of things that have come up, especially in your book, Kirsten and Melinda, we talk about this all the time, is this whole idea about early specialization and getting the kids in. Melinda, your daughter, she's gonna start soon, right? No, it just starting them too early. I just wanted to kind of pivot our conversation. Like, what is your thought about early specialization, and how do we make sure we've seen all these trends in mental awareness and mental crisis? Our kids now are having more anxiety. There's more depression showing up. So how do we make sure we're creating an environment where we're raising these healthy athletes?
We know,
Yeah, you jump in. You go.
we know that if they're active at 23, they'll be more likely to be active for the rest of their life. So we want to raise athletes for life. So if we look at it like a marathon, not a sprint, and it's not just about getting to the top of the podium or the pinnacle of the sport, but actually having the longevity, less anxiety, less depression, more coping skills, more agency, understanding what it takes to overcome obstacles. Those are the big lessons that you're going to get. I like to talk about it as a story that someday your child will be looking back, telling their story of youth sports. And parents, when you think about it, like, what do you want them to be saying? Oh, the car ride home. Remember how miserable the car ride home was, right? No. So when they're young, I get it. If everybody's in kick and chase at 3, you want to be a part of it. That's awesome. Sign them up. Sign up for everything. Try the art, try the ballet, try the, surfing, like try a bunch of things. I'd say when they're under 13, friends, fun, and fundamentals. Those are the 3 F's you should be focused on. Find a coach that gets that we're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to make some new friends, and you're going to learn the basics of this sport. The winning, not the medal, not the trophy at the end of the season. The winning, notification at the end of the season is, man, that was great. I want to do that again.
Mhm.
You have everybody sign up the next season, coach. You've done a good job.
Yeah.
Parents, coaches, avoid the 4th F, FOMO. Yeah, but what are they doing? Yeah, but what are they? Well, they have a private coach, and they're already going to Sweden this summer, and he's 8 and he's ahead of me. Stay in your lane.
Mhm.
We only get 18 summers with them. family decision. What are our values and what are the stories we want them telling? Again, 10, 15 years from now, they probably won't remember that 350-second soccer tournament.
Yeah.
They'll remember that night that you guys all camped in the backyard with their cousins and then stayed up all night at night. We didn't have to sleep. We got to think about the bigger picture too.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. Gosh, I feel like I could go a bazillion places with this question, but
We've talked about this a lot, Melinda.
yeah, I mean, the way I see it is, I think I look at depression and anxiety as cues, right? So lots of college athletes, come in like having a panic attack, starting to feel depressed. Like those are the things that bring athletes in the door. And then obviously they can do some really great work. And so like from my perspective, I would say those are cues. So like watch for those cues. Like if that's happening, you got to question like what's going on. How do we get here? What isn't going well for my kid? What's getting in the way? So I would say look at that as cues. I definitely think like we need to do earlier programming. So I think from a mental health perspective, we should be integrating, mental health and performance work into youth sport, into high schools. I just think there's so much work we can do around prevention. A lot of athletes tend to suppress emotion and manage things in lots of different ways that can lead to, alcohol and drug use, disordered eating, all sorts of things. And so I think like there's just so much that we can do to help prevent some of the mental health challenges that we're seeing in collegiate sport. The other thing I'll say is like finding the joy, going back to like fun, finding the joy in sport from a performance standpoint. When you're in love with your sport, when you find the joy, like you work harder, you train harder. When you're in an environment with a coach that inspires that, you want to give them more. It's like we all can relate to that even in our work environment. And so I think like really trying to hone in on that is going to help them perform better. If they're unhappy, if they're burned out, if it's too much, they're also going to underperform.
Yeah. And actually, Kirsten, before Melinda jumped on, before I hit record, I was sharing a story about, we just had a tour on our campus and this young man was walking through campus and his parents were like, hey, he wants to get back into sports, but he has to take a year off from baseball. I'm like, well, what's going on? Well, because he started so early, he blew his arm out. He was out for a whole year. And they were talking about it, and the timing was amazing because they're like, well, this is our only kid, and we wish we would have known because we threw him into every travel ball. We had the extra pitching on the side because that's what people were telling us what we needed to do. I mean, Kirsten, you talked about the whole idea of FOMO, fear of missing out. Parents are getting all this pressure from people on the outside world that might not have the best intention for their kid, but they're feeding them this story. They're feeding them this narrative. Like, think about how many kids actually go on to play college sports. It's what, less than 7%? Right. But meanwhile, yeah, it's crazy. And then we have 70% of our kids dropping out of sports before the age of 13 because of all these factors that are going on. So if we're looking at raising healthy athletes, we got to take a step back and see the big picture. And I think a big thing for us is understanding what is our actual role as a parent when we go to a sporting event. I was wondering if we could talk about that. What's our role? Like having some clarity around our role as parents. So what are some thoughts there?
So it's just funny what came to mind when you were starting the parents admitting that they kind of had overpushed. I've had 4 dads call me in the last month saying, I'm the problem.
Right.
And I'm like, wow. And they were all D1 or pro athletes.
Yes.
So I used to have a theory where I thought, well, the higher people played, the more they lean back because they know how much work it is. And in general, I can say that. Like a lot of parents who have played, even through college, are like, okay, it's a lot of work. I'm not going to push. If they want it, they know. But occasionally we've become so competitive in our society, and again, what's going on social media, what everybody else is doing, we get so wrapped around the axle about it needs to happen now and it needs to happen, if it hasn't happened by 9, we're going to miss out.
Yeah.
Our role is to be, as Melinda was saying, is to be the guide, to ask the questions and to see we're so much better off when they're pulling on the rope versus shoving it down their throat. And I get this call a lot. Yeah. But you don't understand. They're really talented. Well,
Mm.
they can be the most talented athlete in the world. And if they hate their sport, okay, they may suck it up for the college scholarship. But is that really the, outcome that you want for your kid? You want them to be in love with it so much that they are asking for more. And so for you parents who have young athletes, try all the things and be careful around. I mean, I had both of my sons played Division I basketball, and I would literally have to pull them, on summer. I remember I had one that sat in the back of the raft on a, float trip, like with his arms crossed, that he wasn't at the basketball tournament. And, I said, we're going to have family time. I'm sorry, we're going to take a break. And sure enough, when I bring up that 10 years later, what did you think of that trip down the rafting? He's like, oh, this is the best trip ever. Like,
Right.
really? Because that's not how you behaved. You behaved like I was, ruining your life. So sometimes parents, and I get it, if you have somebody who's super passionate about what they do, you think, okay, I just need to let them do it. We're not gonna have any breaks. We're not gonna go on vacation. We're not gonna take weekends. No, we are their bumpers on the bowling alley of life. Like,
Hmm.
the ball's gonna keep going down. We've got to be the ones so that they don't blow their arm out, so that they don't, find that they need some coping mechanisms with drugs or alcohol or video games and pornography and all these things that are at their fingertips 24/7 now. We want it to be a place of comfort and fun, and not, ugh, I have to go do this because my dad or my mom say I'm good at this.
Hmm. Yeah, I think encouraging balance is so important, and I think encouraging taking breaks is really important and healthy. And I think, like, I worked with this group of really young beach players. This was many years ago, and the parents were involved. It was this great discussion, and they were sort of like, what do we say? What do we do? How do we support you? And this one little girl was so she just said the most powerful thing. All the parents were sort of like, but she basically just said, I don't need my parents to say anything after I don't play well. Like, I just need a hug from my dad. That's it, basically. And so I think, say less, saying less is more. When things aren't going well, I always think, like, invite curiosity, like, how are you doing? How are you feeling? What do you think you need? So again, like, letting athletes lead. And I think, like, take them out for ice cream, give them a hug, go play mini golf, like, go to the batting cages and have some fun. I think that models, like, it's okay, and you can, like, reset and rebound, and you don't have to sort of, like, drown in the over processing of what just happened. So I think this idea of, like, helping them to shift is really important. And then promoting healthy messages around balance, and investing in other parts of their life. I met with a group of athletes who were, gosh, like, doing a master's program. This was a couple years ago now, and they all said, I asked them, like, what do you wish you would have done differently in high school? And they said, like, I wish I would have invested in other things outside of sport, because I would have had more cushion.
Yeah, actually, Melinda, we've talked about that a lot, and I see it where our athletes just identify as being an athlete,
Mm.
right? And the dangers of that, and the pitfalls of that, where
Yeah.
we've used the analogy, and this comes from Brad Stulberg in his book Master of Change, and Brad talks about, we have to live in a multi-room house, right? We
Hmm.
can't live in a single studio apartment, because if that room's not working out, if I just identify as an athlete and that
Hmm.
room's not working out, I have nowhere else to go. Right.
Hmm.
And as parents, I think we're responsible for that too, to make sure we're getting our kids out there. If they love music, get them in the music room. If they love reading, go in the reading room. If they love video games, let them go do some video games. It doesn't just have to be about sports, because again, we're trying, like Kirsten, you said, we're trying to build lifelong athletes. And the window's so short to be in this competitive role. But the bigger picture is building something that they can sustain for the rest of their life. And that's the beauty of sports.
Yeah, having multiple interests is important, and because Jennifer Wallace wrote a great book called Never Enough, and it's about what's going on with our kids these days, which is all of their value is being channeled through their GPA and their, batting average or whatever sport they're playing. And so when, not if, but when one of those two things isn't going well, you see the suicide rates, you see this, like, my life is over. There's too much pressure. I can't handle this, versus you have a role in this family. You have chores, you have, so when things aren't going well, great. So, what's your part-time job? What are your other hobbies? Dad and I like movies. Mom and I do cooking together. Like, think of the other things that they add value because they are a member of the family.
Yeah.
Whether they play a sport or not does not matter. And my middle one was during COVID, was sitting at the kitchen counter in tears. He wasn't getting recruited. His older brother had been recruited. And we were like, what's going on, Parker? And he's like, what am I if I'm not playing basketball? And I was like, I'm a horrible parent. You think the only value we place is on whether you play basketball or not? No way, man. That is a thing you do. It is not who you are.
I like to think of like self-esteem as a plate of marbles, right? And if you've got a lot of marbles, Matt, we've talked about this too. Like if you got a lot of marbles, you can risk losing a few here or there. Like no big deal. Like your sense of self has like cushion and it's robust. And I think from a performance standpoint, it allows athletes to take more risks, right? When they've got a lot of marbles. And I think from like a health perspective too, it's the same thing. Like you're invested in a lot of different things, you got a lot of different roles, you have a lot of different avenues of self-esteem. So therefore you have cushion if things aren't going well. Particularly now we're talking about injuries, like, 10-year-olds are tearing their ACLs and, it's really crazy, the risk of injury these days. And so inevitably it feels like athletes are going to be sidelined for a part of their career, potentially.
And parents, if you're the one who it was your sport and you're all in and you really want them to succeed, find something else to bond with them over. And maybe it's something, here's a really great one, have them teach you something. I had a 5-time Olympian on my podcast, and she was taking piano lessons with her 7-year-old daughter. And she's like, she's so much better than me.
Yeah.
Teaching me so much. They can be young. And again, she said, like, being okay with letting them model, let them teach you so that you can be the learner. You don't always have to be the one giving the instruction. They're so knowledgeable. And talk about agency. Like, oh my gosh, I got to teach my mom hot cross buns. And like, how cool is that? She's so proud of herself that she got to do that.
Yeah, I love that. We actually talked about that with my good friend Trevor Reagan with the Learner Lab, and he talks about we do like a untalent show. So what we do is we pick a skill that we're not good at. And for us as coaches and for us as parents, like sometimes we forget about the learning process and we forget about how hard it is. So we pick a skill, we take 2 weeks to learn that skill, and in your athletes will see you struggle, or your kids will see you struggle. And then we it brings that empathy back. It's like, this is a hard thing, right? Trying to go through this learning process. It's an ugly thing. So it just brings more awareness to us. And I think that's one piece of it, right, Kirsten? And you talk about in your book, it's this triad. It's the parent, it's the coach, and the athlete. So I wonder if we could shift real quick to the coach's role. What is the coach's role in all of this, in this scenario? I know, Kirsten, you talk a lot about transactional versus transformational coaching. So what is the coach's role to make sure we're creating the best environment for our young athletes?
When you think about transformational, at least for me, John Wooden is the pinnacle of that, UCLA, right? Like legendary coach who I used to do my podcast with Susie Walton, who her former husband, Bill Walton, was one of his players. And he would tell the story that the first practice of every season, he would have everybody sit down and take their shoes off. Why? Because we're going to learn how to put our socks on the right way so that we can put our shoes on the right way so that we don't get blisters, so that you'll be able to play longer. And these were the national champion UCLA Bruins. And he was very foundational. His ego was never involved. It was never, I am the leader. We are the team. Yeah. When you're looking at coaching and when you're interviewing clubs, look for those things that show that it's not about how many trophies they have, what ranking they are. I mean, we're the 9U national champ. No, you're not. Like, that is not a thing and is not important. And a transactional coach will be, did you know that back in 1955, I was the national champion? And they'll read you their resume. You talk about when you talk about the end of going to the end of the season banquets are always fun. When the coach talks about themselves the entire time, like those are the kind of red flags that you want to look for when you're looking for finding coaches that are going to really build your sons and daughters. One of my sons played at a prep school, and his coach had used the phrase long-term greedy. And he's like, I want to be at your wedding. I want us to have such a great relationship that I'm in your life the rest of your life. And I was like, oh, right. I'll play every day. He may not be the best X's and O's coach, but I'll take somebody who sees my son for who he is every day and twice on Sunday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I'm super attuned to the relationship, and I think the coaching environment is so important in terms of building self-esteem and confidence and helping players excel. So, like I encourage parents and athletes when they're looking at coaches, particularly, for college sport, is to like ask, like, what's your coaching philosophy? How do you have difficult conversations? What's your philosophy around approaching difficult conversations or giving feedback? What do you do to invest in team culture? What do you do to invest in leadership? How do you build that on your team? Like, and asking some of the hard questions, I think too, is going to be important to really understand, like, if my kid's not doing well, how do you handle that? If my kid gets injured, what are the resources? I would also say, like, look at how coaches treat their staff.
Yeah.
Like that's important. Like, what do you see there? Observe. And I think that obviously, well, I'll say this too, is like, also you got to know who your kid is and what's a good fit for them too. Cause I always use this analogy, silly, from like recent, my best friend and I, this was years ago now, but we went to like a spin class and we left the class and I was like, that was the worst class I've ever taken. And she was like, I loved him. Like that was the best instructor ever. And I'm like, wow, how did we have such a different, like wildly different experience? And, but we need different things, right? Different things motivate us. And so I think like it's good to know who your kid is and what environment are they going to thrive in? What coaches have they done well with? And is it a good match?
Yeah, I love it. And, just hearing both of you talk, I think what we do as coaches a lot, man, we love to tell, and we forget to ask, right? And the power of asking questions. And that kind of, Melinda, you were talking about some of the questions that you would have athletes ask coaches. And I think that transitions well to the next topic I wanted to touch on was this whole idea. Let's say our athletes are lucky enough to go on to the collegiate level, right? And we talked about only like 7% go on, but now the landscape has really changed with the portal and all the stuff going on in recruiting. What are some tips y'all give to parents as far as this recruiting game if their kids are lucky enough to move on to the next level?
Yeah. So whose dream is it? Making sure it's their dream. I would start there, right? What is your why? I love asking athletes that. Why do you play? Then they get really clear on that. The exercise I did with both of my sons and I do with clients is give me your top 25 to 50 schools and why. Is it big city, little city? Is it, go deep on what do they offer? What is their academics like? What are not just stuff you're going to find on the website, but understanding really the ins and outs. And then I actually have a free recruiting guide on my website, which goes into all those questions that Melinda was just asking, which is an interview. This is such a gift. Even if your kid doesn't even end up playing, this is the precursor to that first job interview that they're going to have, right? So what a great experience, right? And I've had kids who are like, oh, it's D3. I'm not even going to call them back. No. Yeah. We respond to every single person who reaches out to us, because guess what? That D3 coach next year will be sitting in that D1 chair that you wanted to be at, or he's best friends with, or he's sitting next to a school, at the recruiting event. And it's a very small little world of recruiting. So word travels fast. And if you're the kid, I remember one kid told me, he's like, oh yeah, he goes, I just respond, my dad's handling my recruiting, You're going to get crossed off everybody's list. Nothing sinks you faster than not proactively reaching out to the schools. Of course, they can't respond back until after June 15th of your sophomore year. But, if you're really interested in that, start practicing. And then when they do respond, again, it's like dating. You're getting to know each other. Yeah. You have a list of questions, I remember sitting with my second son and I had 25, pick the 5 that you want to ask him. The guy was like, wow, you're really prepared. You showing interest and not just like, what was your record last year? Or, why do you want me? But really deeper questions are what are going to show to them that you're interested. I also highly recommend, if you live anywhere close to it, go see the campus, go be at camp.
Yeah.
Go be at a live be at a live event where you get to meet and work with the staff, get to meet the players. You get a pretty quick sense of whether people like each other, people don't like each other, right? Understand. I had one athlete coming from Maryland who went to Stanford for a soccer camp. I said, know that roster, know every coach on that, and said, sure enough, 500 kids in the camp. Okay, where did coach so and so go to school? Oh, I know the answer. Where did coach so and so do? Oh, I know the answer. She's like, pretty soon I'm getting called up to the front.
Yeah.
You still have to be able to play soccer. I'm not saying like that's the shoe in, but being prepared, the preparation plus the opportunity is when the magic happens.
Mm-hmm.
Love it.
I love that. I think similar to the dating analogy, like if, when you're engaged with multiple coaches, I think if you're lucky enough, right? I think it's a data point, like how people get to know you, how they respond, how they answer your questions. I think it's great to have multiple data points so that you can have a gut reaction around like what's a good fit. And I totally agree. Same thing with visiting, the campus or going to games, watching the team, just, paying attention to body language, kind of checking things out there. And asking the hard questions to the coach and also current players, if and when you get that experience around like what's hard about being on this team, what challenges have you all faced and how'd you work through it as a team? Like those kinds of questions. I think it's those are not the questions that we want to ask right away, but I think those are telling, how current players are answering those questions and how honest they are and open. So I think those things are really important.
And one thing I always tell our kids is make sure you take the sport out of the analogy. If you're going to visit a school, make sure you like the school beyond just sports, because we could always get injured. We could be sidelined for months. You got to make sure you like the school for more than just the athletics.
And we know that NIL has changed the landscape of the transfer portal, but that's even that top percentage of the one, of football and basketball, a little bit of volleyball, a little bit, is driving most of that. So in your recruiting, for most of us, we should be thinking about fit and about how we think our athlete is going to thrive there as a student and an athlete. To your point, I call it the broken leg test. How are you in an environment where you can succeed? And when you see kids that only go for the great locker rooms and the brand new uniforms, usually it doesn't work out. And that was me. Coming from Montana, went to San Diego State, never been there, never met the coach, never met shocker. It didn't work out. But that's where you can really, now with the internet, you can DM some of the players. Hey, thinking of coming here. Would you jump on a call with me? Most kids are like, great, I'd love to talk to you. Get the real inside scoop of, we're all here. We all work hard. This is what we believe in. You don't want to get a mismatch culturally. Where one girl went to a school she really liked for the volleyball standpoint, but all the girls were off the court partying the whole during the season. And she's like, that's not at all. I'm an academic kid and the volleyball's good, but when the partying on the bus ride home is not who I am. And that's important to know up front.
Mm-hmm. As you were talking, I was just thinking too, it's almost like ask the players who are sidelined how they're doing.
Yeah.
On that team.
Yeah.
How do they feel valued? How do they, what's their role? Look to those players to see, just in the case that you find yourself in that position, right? I think that says a lot about a team. The other thing I'll say is, and I know there's a lot of challenges with the transfer portal, but I think just similar to if we use the job analogy, any company, we take a big company that sort of, I don't know, Google or, Meta or, people say, oh, it's going to be great. I'm going to work here and I got this amazing job. And if it's not a good culture fit, right, it's not the right place for you and you have to be able to maneuver. And so I do appreciate that the transfer portal allows for athletes to sort of recognize like this isn't working, and I don't feel valued here. I'm not getting the playing time I want, or this isn't the right fit for me. And to be able to shift and go to a place, I've had a lot of athletes I've worked with who had wonderful experiences after transferring, and it's been they found the joy in their sport again. It's a better fit for them from a playing time perspective. They're feeling valued, and they're getting to play, and so I think there can be some really important positive things. So I also think while we want to encourage kids to like sort of make it work and try to figure out like how to stay and participate and invest, we also want to allow for our kids to make changes.
Yeah.
You only know what you know until you get somewhere, and same with a job. It might not be the right fit, and you got to be able to make a change.
Yeah, what's crazy about that, even at the high school level, especially here in Florida, we have school choice. So kids can go to any school as long as they can get them there. And I think that's to your point, Melinda, is we want to make sure our kids are in the right environment, right culture. So if they do have to pivot, one, they have to pivot for the right reason, where it's just not for playing time and stuff like that. But it's okay to make that change if it's for the right decisions to get you back into the right culture where you really feel, where you're seen, you're valued, you feel like you belong, all those things. And again, I think that comes back to us as coaches. I'm always going to get to the coaches because we're the ones that create the environment. But it's okay to make that pivot if it's for the right reasons.
Mm-hmm. The other thing is the coaching landscape has changed, right?
Yeah,
So you
big
get
time.
recruited by a coach who, by the time you get to the team, the coach is somewhere else.
Yep.
That's really hard. If you built a relationship, you feel really safe with that person, you feel like that was the right fit for you, and now you're adjusting to a big change. And so I do think it's important to like keep in mind that the whole landscape has shifted. So we have to be flexible.
Yeah. And I think, we could probably stay on all day and talk about this all day, but I wanted to see if we can just get any final thoughts about, our role as parents or raising these, in your words, Kirsten, how can we make sure we're raising happy, brave, and resilient kids? So any final thoughts to kind of wrap up our conversation today?
I like to say you got to name it to tame it. So if you're feeling like, wow, I'm not behaving my best, if you're aware of even if it's nothing like my opening story is a guy paid to fly a plane over, a baseball field, not because they didn't like the coach, not because they weren't winning, but because his kid wasn't playing. Okay, most of us aren't going to pay to fly a plane over, but when you're sitting on the sidelines and you're like, my kid isn't playing, or they're not playing well, or what's going on, but identifying that within yourself and then getting the tools that you need, which are things that Melinda and I work with clients on, because we've got to be, I like to think of it as a tree, as the metaphor of, and the more rooted we are as parents, not if, but when the winds blow, when the storms come, we're rooted. Oh, that sucks that you lost. Oh, that stinks that you got cut.
Yeah.
What are you going to do about it? How can I support you? This is your journey. My athletic journey is over, but I want to make sure I'm here for you.
Mm-hmm.
Love that.
I love that too. Yeah, I guess from my perspective, as I think about like vulnerability, I think about performance, athletes they need confidence, right? They need confidence to approach things that are hard. And so that means like everyone's got to go through failure. And it is a vulnerable place to like put yourself out there to take the shot, even when you may miss it. Right. And so I think like they need us to be along for the ride and in it with them. Right. So like whether it's like the highs of winning or the lows of failing, to try to just like mirror that and be in it with them. And to Kirsten's point, like, oh man, like, yeah, that was a rough one. But I'm so proud of you for taking the shot.
Yeah.
Like I can see how like disappointing that is, but good job. You were resilient in that moment. Or how are you going to rebound? Like, let's focus on that. So like, I think like taking a step back too, and Kirsten, you mentioned this, like the sort of the long game, right? Is like, what lesson can I like teach my kid right now if I zoom out? So like, don't get zoomed in, because that's when we sort of get in the frustration of things and we want to fight for our kid and we want to advocate for them. It's like zoom out and think about, okay, like what this has got to be a lesson right now. So like, what can I teach my kid, or what lesson might they learn, from this, and kind of like ride the wave with them.
Yeah, I love that you just brought that up, Melinda. As parents, I think we do focus so much on that short term, right? And we forget about what is actually the long-term goal of participating in sports. And I always lean on this quote from Dr. Tim Elmore, and he always talks about our role or our job as parents is not to clear the path for our kids. It's to set them up for the path. Right. And sometimes that is hard. Sometimes we have to challenge our kids. But like you said, Melinda, if we stretch out long term and we do what's best for our kids, we're setting them up to be successful in all facets of life. And that's really what sports should be used for. Right. It's not to get these crazy contracts and all that stuff. All that stuff fades away. It's to set them up to be successful in everything they do moving forward.
And so, what are you modeling for your kids? What are you sharing around the dinner table, if that happens anymore, right? Of, gosh, I had a rough day. Yes, I failed in my presentation. I fell flat on my face. Like modeling for them that it's okay to not be perfect. And I think we need to do a lot more of that, because the pressure that they feel, the cute little joke, but a kid comes into the kitchen and the mom's making eggs and he's like, Mom, you got to flip the eggs. Mom, you're burning the eggs. She's like, leave me alone. He's like, well, that's the way it is when I'm on the field. Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we're micromanaging, they can hear you from, the only voice we're trained to hear is our parents. Right. So it can cut through a stadium of people. Allow them to have the journey, model for them that I'm not doing it perfectly either. Gosh, I burned the eggs. Okay, we'll do better next time.
Yeah. Love it.
Yeah, I think all the lessons that they learn are setting them up for success. Like even as I think about like, okay, let's say they change courses because it's not the right culture fit, or it's not the right environment for them, or it's not the right coaching fit. It's like, that's going to help them get out of a relationship that's not the right fit when it's hard to end a relationship that they've invested in, or that's going to help them get out of a job that's not the right fit. Like these are decisions that are going to really help them to be healthy in their future lives. And so I think like that's why we want to teach them those lessons now, so that translate.
The same thing in the classroom, right? Like if your parents, you're in the portal all the time, you're checking the grades all the time, you're meeting with the teacher all the time. I don't care. Kindergarten, first grade, second grade, you can teach them to have agency and advocate for themselves starting at a very, very young age. And we're way too overly invested in that too. So modeling that in both sides of their, all facets of their life is really important.
Yeah, I love it. I always tell our coach, and I tell our parents, it's not about us, but it starts with us. Right. And exactly what you're all saying. We have to model the way. And so again, like I'm sitting here, I know I got pages of notes. I'm all fired up. And again, the timing of this conversation is great, because here we is May 20th and we're rolling into summer. We have all the crazy travel ball schedule coming up and AAU basketball. So I just can't thank you all enough for jumping on today, sharing all these great insights, all this stuff about this crazy new landscape of sports. But I just wanted to ask you all, if our listeners wanted to reach out and learn a little bit more about your work, is there a place they can follow you on social media, website? Like, how can they learn more from you both?
Yeah, all the things, of course, right?
Yeah.
But at Kirsten Jones Coach on Instagram, LinkedIn. My website is kirstenjonesinc.com. You can find a lot of freebies like parenting do's and don'ts and sports parenting do's and don'ts. That's what I want. My dream is to help others. I think we're all in this together. When we know better, we do better, Maya Angelou, right? So we're all helping each other, and high tides raise all boats. So check out my podcast. I interview other authors and coaches and athletes about these topics, because I think the more we can hear it, the more it becomes part of our vernacular. We're like, oh, okay, I get it. And I can make different choices too. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
And yeah, my website's for the players.com. I don't have a social media presence professionally. It just not yet. And maybe not ever. We'll see. I think I'm gonna take what we've learned from this podcast and focus on my daughter. It's so great. As we were talking, I'm like, wow, I just gotta, even with like feeding herself, right? It's like I gotta just like let her learn and like not put the spoon in her mouth, like basically, right? And like make the mess. So this is just always helping me to learn how to do better. But yeah, Matt, I just so appreciate it. And Kirsten, also appreciate, our working relationship, and so happy to be here and have this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it took a year, but
I know.
all right. So again, Melinda, I can't thank you enough for connecting me with Kirsten. Kirsten, thank you so much for jumping on. I know this conversation is going to add so much value to our listeners. So I just can't thank you enough for being on the Being Champions podcast.
We're in LA, but we love to travel, so you can bring us to Florida. I mean, we need to do some in-person stuff too. That'd be sweet.
We will talk soon then.
That's right.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Okay, listen, I hope you all enjoyed that conversation with Kirsten and Melinda. I'm sitting here with pages of notes, and you know, this conversation has been a long time coming. Melinda and I started talking about this about a year ago, and we just recognized how important this topic was in creating some time and creating some space to give some education as far as this new landscape of sports. And I think my biggest takeaway was, as a parent and as a coach, really taking the time to step back and give ownership back to our kids. And that's what it's really about, is this is their experience, right? And not everyone has to go on to play college. Not everyone has to be a D1 athlete, or not everyone's going to get paid to play sports. I think the most important thing is sports can be the greatest life teacher, but we have to make sure we're teaching it the right way. Right, and understanding like this is an opportunity for our kids to learn how to be resilient, to learn how to overcome adversity, to learn how to overcome obstacles. And that's what it's really about. We're trying to develop lifelong athletes, right, and let them thrive because of what they learn in this sport environment. So again, take a look at what you're doing in your environment. Are you being that over-involved parent? Or are you being a transactional coach? And understand, like, this is about the bigger picture. This is about allowing our kids to develop the best versions of themselves and to discover their hidden potential. So once again, I always appreciate everyone that logs in and listens to us on a weekly basis. Can't wait to keep bringing these episodes, and hope you tune in next week. So once again, thanks again for tuning into the Being Champions podcast. Thanks.